that simple way of being, of hunting and gathering and providing your own needs, that's been gradually stripped from us. And because of the disconnection that humanity as a whole has from the natural world, more and more people are less and less capable of actually giving that to themselves.
As we see these days, especially this generation, we're so dependent on our parents, emotionally, financially, spiritually, physically, for them to look after us. And it's like the first generation that we're not taught to be independent. And when you look at the parents, it's almost like they need the children to make them whole and complete them, because the husband, for example, or the partner, isn't making them whole. And so what happens is that, you depend on the children to make you whole, where you kind of don't want them to leave, you don't want them to be independent. So you basically keep baby feeding them. And then when they're like, say, 40, and they eventually leave the nest, they don't know what to do.
Right, and so we're at that sort of juncture in consciousness as a species, as a civilization, where we're kind of being corralled and steered towards a very dark, dystopian, transhumanist agenda. And you see it on social media, something rolls out in the collective, everyone witnesses this horrific thing, everyone's in a trauma reaction, and then here comes the program. That's MK Ultra, en masse. Trauma and then programming. That's mind control.
Just quickly, I just want to say a massive thank you to everyone who still listens to the podcast. I started 4 years ago, and since then I've had over 1 million downloads. I get 5,000 downloads per month, and I've had over 200 different guests. So a massive thank you to everyone who still listens. If you could please do me a favour, if you could rate and review the podcast, that would be amazing, because it helps get the podcast out to new, conscious people like yourself. And my goal is to awaken as many people around the world. You can also follow me on Instagram. It's Yes King Oliver, should you wish to see what I get up to on my day-to-day moments. Back to the episode.
So I've been living in my camper van for the past month, and before I lived in a huge conscious community, massive building, people everywhere who are conscious. The heat's on, you've got aircon if you need it, you've got saunas, you've got ice bath, you've got community food, you've got a studio, you've got a co-working space. You've got the dream. Every night there was something on. There was workshops, there was music on stage, there was events. My contract expired, and rather than renewing, because I'm going traveling soon, I decided to live in my van for a month. And what I've realized is that I'm just as happy in my van as I was being there. And that almost 95% of all the things I had there in my room, I don't need, because I haven't needed. So it just makes you realize all the stuff that we have in our life that we think we need to fulfill us and make us whole is based on a belief that we need these things to fulfill us. And actually, we have everything we need within us. And it's only when you're put in a situation like this, where you don't have your comforts and your basics, do you realize I'm actually fine. I'm just as fine as I was compared to when I had everything at the place I was living at.
Love that. I had a similar experience when I was 14. I did a Outward Bound when I was a kid, which is like a survival training. And I remember being, in the middle of nowhere, Great Lakes, and you're cold and you find a pair of socks and you're like, oh my God, socks. Yes. And having that like early interruption of like, oh, wow, being in nature is really enough. And then we're so conditioned to be so dependent on so many comforts, for sure.
It's like we are so used to having like extra extreme positives that when we have a negative, which is just something normal, it seems like the whole world is against us. And so we then do the opposite to get back to that comfort. Whereas if, for example, like I wake up in the van a little cold, I'm really appreciative of my duvet or my thick duvet. And I think like even my grandparents, they didn't have a duvet. They had like 5 blankets, and that was their warmth, and there was no central heating. They literally just had blankets. So I'm grateful for having a thick quilt. I'm grateful for having a nice, cozy, like cotton pillow. And then when I do put my jumper on, I'm like, oh, this feels incredible. I feel whole, I feel complete. And really, I'm just neutral. Like I had a little small cold situation. I'm now really warm. I'm grateful for being warm. And if you translate that to stuff in life, such as we want this car, for example, we get the car and we feel great. And then it's like, right, this feeling is normal now. Now what? And we're chasing like the next positive to counteract the negative when it could literally just be, I'm cold, now I'm warm. I'm really hungry. I've got to wait for my flipping stove to 15 minutes to heat up and I can't wait to eat it. And that nourishment of, wow, took 15 minutes, but man, I enjoyed that more than anything.
Right. Yeah, it definitely brings up a question of what do we actually require to be fulfilled? Like what's actually required for satisfaction, for deep fulfillment. I think different people have different metrics of that. We're all conditioned in different ways towards, society's pressures, family pressures around success, the avoidance of pain, or the seeking of pleasure. All these things are sort of existential things that we're all negotiating with, consciously or unconsciously. And I think part of the path of spirituality and self-empowerment is getting really in touch with your why, getting in touch with those dynamics in our life. What is motivating you? What is actually bringing you a deep sense of either peace or satisfaction or fulfillment? And yeah, I think as in the West, we're deeply conditioned to externalize our experience, to that it all comes from the outside, when sort of many traditions look at it, it's an inside job. And what's the balance of both? Because obviously, it's an easy conversation to have if your basic needs are met, and there's tons of populations out there that don't even have their basic needs met. And I've seen a lot of them actually happier than more people in the West. Like I've been in a hut in Mexico with a indigenous family, and they're just smiling, and they're making their little tortillas, and everyone's running around and playing, and because there's that close connection to the earth. Right. So there's something that I've been examining for a long time of like how much the disconnection with our Mother Earth informs this deep sense of dissatisfaction or uneasiness. And then you take all the pressures of capitalism and sort of entrepreneurship and needing to be an achiever, which all of us that are in this field, I think, have some percentage of needing to be and do and more and more. And what's the alignment of like being of service without getting into that sort of hamster wheel?
Yeah, so if you told somebody who's got like everything, okay, you're going to be outside in a tent and you're going to be cold and you're going to have no shoes. So when you walk on the ground, it's going to be slightly cold and your toes are going to feel like squelchy in the mud. They'd be like, absolutely no way.
Yeah.
You ask them in their big house whilst they're watching Netflix, are you really, really, really happy and fulfilled? Chances are they wouldn't be 100% fulfilled. And so then you look at the alternative, such as people in these other parts of the world where they have the basic, they've got community, they're literally cooking on the ground in a pot and they're sharing that food with loads of people, say it's just rice, maybe not even much flavoring, and they're literally going to the stream and getting the water, carrying it back just to make that rice. Ask them, are they happy? They wouldn't really have the difference to compare of what's unhappy and happy because that's all that they've known. And so if they're just living and being and existing, then they're just being. But you could say they are happy. So they haven't got unhappiness to compare to because they've literally just done this. They've seen their surroundings, their village and their family do the same thing. What is unhappy? Like carrying water for 2 hours before? Well, that's just what you've got to do. So we've got such a comparison of unhappy and happy that when we compare the two, it seems that which is what's normal in most of the world is unhappy. And so we go to that, which is happy. But really, it's just a comparison. The true happiness is going back to where all of this started, which is what were we doing before this? Just literally existing with people on the ground, cooking locally with what's there. Everyone's chipping in. You're outside, oxygen, air, light, earth, grounding, squatting down. So you're like, your posture is different compared to like how we're just on computers all the day, shitting properly because we're squatting properly. So there's no constipation, there's no piles, so there's no medication and there's no strain. Everything is because of this world that we have created, which goes against nature.
Yeah, it's a world we inherited. So it's each of our responsibility to renegotiate that relationship, and it really is a personal journey and obviously a collective journey as well. And that's sort of the juncture point we find ourselves as a species right now. Is is, you know, where are you on that spectrum of returning into connection with other, you know, Tyson Yunkampora talks about kin's domain and sort of the Aboriginal Indigenous worldview around everything is based in relationship. It is you know, your primary partner, your family, your village, the land, and how interconnected it all really is. And I think many of us that were raised in Western society, we at least had some sense of village, like growing up. Like we had like the neighborhood, and we used to play like manhunt and like be outside. You know, we're like that last generation that saw the internet come on into the world, and we went from like playing outside to being on, Nintendo 64 and that kind of stuff. So I don't even know what. So I mean, I have a sense, and I've talked to some Gen Zs, but like the different world that we've each inherited, and how further and further and further away from nature many. And then this return, like during COVID, all these people started gardening. There was like a boom in gardening. There was a boom to like homeschooling, and people starting to self-organize and create their cluster of support, so that it's not just four white walls and a family, you know, dealing with just, you know, them and a kid, where it requires a village to raise a child to have satisfaction, so the parents aren't burning out. So there's different mirrors. You have aunties and uncles. A kid falls, someone's there to pick him up. The parents have enough time to have date night. Like, we've lost the village in many, many ways. And I think that's one of the most primary sources of suffering in the Western world is a quality of disconnection that's so deep that people are longing for it. They don't even know what they're longing for. And they try to get that connection through social media. They try to get that connection through these very superficial ways of relating, and really like socially reinforced off-gassing of stress, which is not the same as connection. You know? So yeah, I think the loss of village is something that I've really been seeped in for the last 20 years of my life, and being in and out of different types of communities from many different cultures, and seeing what works and what doesn't.
Yeah, so what's coming to mind is like a dog looking at the TV with your friend on FaceTime. It's like you can see its pet owner, but there's something not quite right. But I can see him, but something's not right. So we're looking for community and people, and we're on our phone, we're seeing community and stuff that's happening, and we're seeing people. So it's like, great, that makes me happy. I like community, I like people. But then it's like, something's not right. Like, that screen is not my owner. That screen is not community. Yeah, I'm looking at Bali, people in Bali having a great time, but something still doesn't feel right. And it's like a trial and error to get back to where we were. And the ironic thing about all this AI and ChatGPT stuff is that it's getting like infinite source of consciousness that anyone can get access to in real time. So they don't have to go through the evolution of evolving and going through all your trauma and shit and going through shamans and therapists, because literally you can get all the access on ChatGPT now. But if it comes back to just going to nature, then you've got like one part going over there, which is into pure consciousness and spirit. And then you've got the old version, which is nature and grounding and the physical body.
Right.
So it's like, they're both great because they both lead to each other. The consciousness will lead to people knowing that it's all about the earth and the grounding. And then you've got other people that are just like, well, this is all there has been. So why don't we just go back to that? So one's like a shortcut, and then one's like a long-winded route back to the same place, which is home is within, with what you already have. Go back to what it was.
Right. Yeah. And I'd say what's really important too in this time is for people to find their genuine purpose, their big reason why they're here, why their soul is here, not their personality, not the identity, not what we inherited from some socially constructed, imposed upon us ideal, but the deep within investigation of why we're here. And once we have purpose, there's a kind of a quality of meaning that can emerge, and that usually has to do with service. Usually has to do with some way of giving back to the whole of creation and knowing our place within creation. So if you don't know your place within village, you don't know your place within creation. There's that where the I meets the we. Like you said, you were in community, and then you're in the solo journey for a bit, and that seems like a necessary part of your journey. In a lot of tribal cultures, there was that rite of passage that happens. Another thing that's missing from our society is like real rites of passage when we're individuating in adolescence. And most people in the Western world are frozen in a permanent state of adolescence and don't know it. So they never actually individuated, because we need a healthy I to come back into community. Otherwise, it's codependency. It's not interdependence. It's just like this like weird social agreements, and you're all enabling this sort of strange social agreement versus, okay, you go on your vision quest when you're turning 13 in tribal culture and you get your own vision. You know your place within creation. You face your fears. You come back because you faced your fears and you've individuated into your own connection. You're now trustable to the society. And then you can find your purpose within the village. So we've lost both. We've lost both the village and the rite of passage that allows people to actually pop into their soul's path. And then a lot of us we're kind of like these cultural orphans that are being initiated by life in this very discombobulated way. I feel fortunate. Some of the initiations that I received were conscious. Some of the initiations I received were not conscious. It was just life smacking me on the side of the head out of nowhere and being like, oh, I'm in initiation post initiation. Oh, that's what that was. You know what I mean? And so I think this is where we are as a society right now, is like, actually, we're in a massive collective initiation, but a lot of people don't have the context that they're in initiation.
Yeah, that's very interesting. It's about the purpose thing. Because like, let's say I create a business and then I've created it, someone else runs it and I'm done. I'm bored. So I create another business, but I'm like, I can't just be doing that. Like, what's missing? And you're right. Back in the day, we'd be in the village. We'd all have a purpose and a role. You look after the kid. You go and do that over there. You do the grass and you do the hay and you get the water. Our purpose would be the village and the community in the village. So no one's thinking, what am I going to do today? I might make a website. No, your job is to get the logs. Get the fucking logs. So we've lost this purpose. So now we're trying to find a purpose. And obviously now we've got limited time. We've got to make money. We have to like choose between like passion and money. And then we're trying to weave the two together. And then we're spending time trying to get out of the purpose of making money to find a passion because we're unhappy. And it's like, we're missing those two things. It was already there. And yeah, that's a very good point. And like, I'm going to Asia very soon and I'm going to see the different communities and how they live out there. And what's great about traveling is it just makes you reflect back to how your home life is and how, like, man, you don't need anything to be happy. Their purpose literally is getting on the boat, finding a fish all day. They're not thinking, oh, fuck, it's 2 o'clock, I haven't found a fish. No, they're in that present moment. They're just getting a fish. And if they don't get a fish, it's part of the goal. It's part of the system and the journey. You go back the next day. That's their purpose. They have their purpose. And we need a purpose because that's why we're going crazy. That's why we're overthinking. That's why ADHD cases are on the rise, because we're spending too much time in our head as opposed to just in our body, digging a hole, chopping down a tree, serving community, whatever we used to do. Yeah.
It's real. It's and it's systemic. And you know, that simple way of being, of hunting and gathering and providing your own needs, that's been gradually stripped from us. And because of the disconnection that humanity as a whole has from the natural world, we're more and more people are less and less capable of actually giving that to themselves. I was reflecting on a friend who's working on an eco village, sort of back to the land kind of project that will require a bunch of money to then not need money. And the irony of that, of like, okay, well, you have to get the money to buy the land, then you need the money to set up your systems, and then some things you can do without the money, like you get your composting, you get your whatever going, and the whole ecosystem of the land and how to listen to it and do the permaculture design, all of that. But that takes some resource from the old world. So we've inherited capitalism. We've inherited a society and a cultural framework that is disconnected from real relationship, from village, from land, from place, from culture, that allows us to be self-sufficient. We've been conditioned into codependency and dependency, and the track that we're going is designed to bring us more and more and more and more and more into dependency, which is disconnected from the mother earth, and how much wholeness we experience when we're in relationship with her. That is a source of wholeness. And so people, they seek out other ways to try to get that wholeness. It's trying to fill a void, it's trying to fill a gap. And it's such a collective and individual journey, which I find really fascinating, that we're all being initiated, whether we know it right now. We have some very important decisions to make about mending that relationship, because it's unsustainable the way we're going. We're eventually going to get a point where certain ecosystems collapse, and you can't fish because the river is poisoned. You can't harvest the berries because they're too close to the highway and they've just been absorbing aluminum for days, and you can't pick berries off the side of the road. Even though pears and berries and nettles and everything we need is like literally erupting out of the land, whether you're in England or certain places. If you can follow the original cultural framework of that land, you will be provided for, but that has been stripped.
And also, like, we are told, especially men, like, ego is bad, ego is arrogant. And it's like, what do you say? You need that ego to put yourself first, to then realize, oh, actually, it's about others and community. It's very important to have ego. Again, like the old narrative of be humble and, put others first. Well, most of the time we're sacrificing our own self and we're putting others first because we're told you should put others first, and it's selfish. But you need to fill yourself up first, fill your cup up first before you give. And the ironic thing about having to make money for the land, it's like, well, I've got to give myself everything so I can buy cars and houses. I know it's not going to make me happy, but I've got to get that so I'm okay. So now when I'm okay, I can give out to the land and other people, because if that disappears, well, I still need to survive in this world. So I need to make sure I've got my kind of a base and a house somewhere.
Right.
Because otherwise I'm just literally just rolling over and doing the same thing everyone else is doing, which is not being self-sufficient and being able to sustain a life of independence, even though it is about always being with people. Because if you're with people, you've always got help. There's always food. There's always assistance. Always someone who can look after the baby. It's literally all there. And living in community versus like coming out of my parents' house, I realized that everything I needed was there. And take away all the facilities and the sauna and all the ice bath crap, which is man-made, just by having your people there, coming down out of your room and having people there to talk to, that was enough. People live alone because they want to be independent and they feel like they're weak if they can't live by themselves. And you have like single mothers not wanting to ask, even like friends, let alone a village, just friends, or asking their like parent for a help because it's seen as weak. And it's like, we've come from people constantly, and this like loneliness epidemic has come from, again, the system telling us that, we're putting us in a situation where we are in survival mode, so we become codependent, and because we just need to survive, we just latch onto people and depend, so that the independent path is so far that way that it seems so foreign that we latch onto systems and governments and depend on hospitals and shit. And again, if that goes, everyone's fucked. Which getting to that way.
Which it will. There's a sort of transit in the human design system that Rob talks about 2027. There's an end of a cycle happening based on astrology and all these other things, and it's very apparent. Like if you want to look through it through a mythological lens, or if you want to look through it through an astrological lens, that you can lose some people, but just very practically, there is a lot of evidence for this. And his prediction is 2027. We end a cycle that started in the 1750s, which is the cross of industry. And the cross of industry kind of built the whole world that we've inherited. It's all the industrialization, it's all the colonialization, it's all the, like you said, like the hospitals and this and all these systems that we rely on. That starts to unravel itself in 2027. And it's kind of the shift from externalized authority to inner authority. So if I've been taught my whole life, you need to do this in order to have this, in order to have this, and you just accept that, and you start to live in that kind of homogeny, versus, oh, there's actually this deep impulse inside of me that's saying go this way, even though the whole culture is saying go that way. People are going to start returning to their inner authority in 2027. And so the word that I would love to introduce to you when you talk about what you're sharing, what we're discussing around codependency and hyper independence, are two spectrums of distortion that was birth of the colonized capitalistic world. What we need to get back to is interdependence. So interdependence is our natural state that we've lost. So we were conditioned into dependency, and as a reaction to codependence, we say, no, I'm independent. I don't want to be engulfed by this thing, and I need to individuate. And it's a very like adolescent, like pushing the engulfing mother away, or I'm pushing the controlling father away, and tries to get hyper independent, but that independent lone wolf will die. It will die if it stays on that track. And so the interdependent model is where there's a healthy I that goes through its rites of passage and knows its place within creation and knows its place within the village, and it comes back into relationship. We don't have models for that. Most of us learned codependency from our parents. We've learned dependency from the system. We've been indoctrinated since we were, through our schooling systems, and we're conditioned to be like, oh yeah, authority outside, listen to the authority, listen to respect, that whole model. And the natural order, or the natural way that human beings have always been in a relationship, is interdependent. You have your needs, your individual needs, and where that meets the whole, and that they're not separate. There's an interconnectedness where you don't feel like you're going to lose your individuality and be absorbed into the cult, or absorbed into the church, or absorbed into this bigger thing. But there's a healthy relationship between the I and the we. And that's where we're being forged into. That's the collective initiation, is the pathway back to interdependence.
And, as we see these days, especially this generation, we're so dependent on our parents, emotionally, financially, spiritually, physically, for them to look after us. And it's like the first generation that we're not taught to be independent. And when you look at the parents, it's almost like they need the children to make them whole and complete them, because the husband, for example, or the partner, isn't making them whole. And so what happens is that, you depend on the children to make you whole, where you kind of don't want them to leave. You don't want them to be independent. So you basically keep baby feeding them. And then when they're like, say, 40, and they eventually leave the nest, they don't know what to do. And so then they attract a woman who, for example, mothers them. And so there's no independence. And it's literally the last two generations that I've seen, maybe to do with the war days, where they literally all had to be independent, otherwise you're not going to survive. After the war, everything's settled down. And then this generation is almost like it's gone backwards, where we're dependent, but the generation before wants to be depended on because they have this purpose. And it goes back to the purpose thing about, we don't have the right purposes. So we're latching on just to any purpose, which is wash the 40-year-old man's clothes because it gives you something to do for 3 hours, because you can't sit down and do nothing because you can't be with yourself because all the shit comes up. So it's like this reversal of, we're supposed to be teaching like the chick how to fly, but instead we're like, oh, I'll just feed the chick the wrong food, so he wants more food, so I can get more food for the chick. So I've got a purpose. And then the baby chick's getting more dependent to the point where it's like, well, he can't leave now because he will die. So you might as well just stay with me forever. And so
yeah, it's real. The pain of codependency is the root of a lot of addiction. And again, we've inherited it's generational trauma. It's the way that our societies have been built. It's designed to create dependency. And coming into an honest relationship with hyper independence and codependency, and committing to a path of interdependence, and really going on that journey of what that actually means to become a healthy whole self that is enough in return to essence, and do the work to return to essence, and then bring that essence forward into relationship where there's, you're out of your coping strategies, because we all inherited these coping strategies. We all developed these coping strategies, these survival mechanisms in our family environments and our family systems. And those family systems, like, again, it's a big thing we've inherited, and it's up to each individual to do their own work and to have more and more new cultural frameworks of how that supports people to enter the path of interdependence. We don't have a frame of reference for it. Like, even in my own, like, this is the healthiest relationship I've ever been in, and we're finding interdependence. We're discovering, and we're like, oh, there's, like, we joke, we call these survival mechanisms and these sort of defensive programs gremlins, so we're not like shaming ourselves or each other. We're like, oh, I just oh, my codependent gremlin just popped up and was like, we need to do this together. And it's like coming from this unhealthy place versus like, oh, I'm choosing to do this with you because it feels good, and we're walking alongside of each other versus being enmeshed. So the enmeshment, it gets familiar. Everyone has survived sort of one layer of trauma, whether that's neglect or abuse or codependency, engulfment, some form of that shows up in our family system. So the ways that we adapted to that, those adaptive strategies can become very sophisticated, ingrained personality traits and ways of moving. And that's a lot of what we experience in community, and sort of whether you're deep in the corporate world or you're deep in the new age, whatever, whatever spectrum of culture that you've ended up into, you're gonna find some degree of these kinds of core distortions in there that are built in codependency or abuse or neglect or capitalism, unfortunately, breeds a very high level of narcissism, and that narcissism shows up in spiritual community just as much as it does in the corporate world. It's like, because that is that like hyper independent, didn't have the space to be nurtured and individuate in a healthy way, never had that initiation, and all the generational shame that was passed down, that narcissistic blind spot refuses to look at the shame and the toxic shame that it inherited through the family system. So there's some things that we're going to have to confront as individuals and as a culture in order to move towards interdependence.
What's your thoughts on this? So let's just say like 2 generations ago, they had like the war and whatever. Well, they probably weren't doing all this like healing stuff that we're doing now, but then they lived, that you could say they lived a more fulfilling life than we did, right? They might have just had not much to do apart from like cut the grass, washing, find some logs, but they had a purpose and they lived life, and they lived, to a good age, and they had shit. They didn't have to deal with all this stuff. We're now doing and dealing with all this stuff. So is it that we've got far more stuff to deal with, that we have to undo it? Or is it the types of things that we're having to deal with and heal is what's making it really hard to be present? Because back in the days, they just sort of kept it in and didn't deal with that shit. And we're all about expressing it and getting it out. So like, what is it? Is it that we're thinking that we have to heal because we're told we have to heal? And actually, if we just get on with it, and we'll actually be fine. But we know no, because it's stored in the body. So it's like, well, they probably had some shit. Was it not stored in their body? If it was, how did they live happily? Like, what the fuck?
So I think I'm getting your question, and it's I got chills when you were sharing. I'm like, yeah, that is an interesting conundrum that we've inherited. I look at my parents, which were like second generation from, like, my grandparents were immigrants, to my grandmother immigrated from Ireland, through Canada down into New York. On my father's side, it was, leaving my grandmother, like, survived hiding in the tall grass from the Cossacks killing all the Jews, and so, and then my other grandfather from Italy, so I have this interesting ancestry of, on my mom's side, it's Italian, Irish, Scottish with a little bit of Welsh. And then my dad's side is Ashkenazi Jews from Ukraine, Russia. And they both had to survive some gnarly stuff. And so when you're in survival, you're on the battlefield. And when you're on the battlefield, you don't have time to grieve. You just handle your business because there's no time to grieve. We're the generation that's like, oh, we're off the battlefield, sort of enough that we can start to grieve. And so we do have another set of problems. We have the world we've inherited in sort of catastrophic, this is really going to affect the next generations, and we're aware of it. So we have a sense of responsibility, and the backlog of unprocessed trauma. So it is both. And it does create a lot of pressure. And so people either want to numb or find ways to cope with, oh my God, I'm the one that's being tasked with healing this generational trauma I've inherited. And I've also inherited this really messed up culture, and I can see the impact of this culture on the world that I care about. And so it's both from the ancestor moving forward, there's all this unprocessed trauma. And from this place looking outward into the future, they're like, I need to do something different because I don't want to pass this on. I don't want my kids to have a poisoned Blake. I don't want my kids to be absorbed into a transhumanist agenda where they're going to be exposed to, entrained to lose their imagination and lose parts of their brain function and neurology because they're being inundated with the stimulation out of the womb. So there's more at risk, there's more responsibility, more that we've inherited as millennials, and each generation has more responsibility that they're being tasked with, and then how they handle that. This is why we need Village. This is why we need the tools, the mentorship, and that's also why it's erupting. It's like breath work is blowing up, yoga in the West, all these things And there's the distorted version of it. Granted, you have the hyper commercialization and appropriation, all these things, but there's also the technologies that we didn't have in the 50s and the 60s that was just in its first wave of like, here's something more expansive, to know that you're not just your body and your mind, your consciousness, your soul on a spiritual journey. That framework is very helpful. When we arrive at the lens of the soul and we see through the soul's lens what is happening and why, we can become empowered to make the choices that we need to make.
Just briefly explain what you meant when you said like the brain's overstimulated when we come out the womb, so we're losing brain function, something like that.
Right. So there's a really good podcast. Let me it's very fresh on my phone because I was just sending it to someone yesterday. So just give me 3 seconds to bring up that interview. It's on the Know Thyself podcast.
Right.
Where yeah, it's under my downloads. It was 2 episodes, which was really powerful. I'm just spacing on the brother's name. Yeah, with, hold on 1 second here.
So it's something like, for example, how I interpreted that is that our brain isn't supposed to be firing up, and neurons aren't supposed to be being connected like that all the time. The dopamine levels flooding our brain all the time, that it's causing like brain damage. And that if you overuse these circuits, then like once you've used them, you've used them.
You're being so the interviews with Greg Braden, and Greg Braden is one of those mystics who bridges to science at a very high level, similar to Joe Dispenza, but a very different lens. Like Greg Braden is probably one of the most integrated elders of our generation that bridges science and spirituality really effectively. And he talks about the impact of AI and, you know, the loss of imagination and what that does to the amygdala, and like that in one generation we will see literal like brain damage if that generation's getting that much of exposure. Then we stop using our imagination. What happens when we stop using our imagination? What happens when we start to outsource our immune system versus our own natural immunity, right? And we're saying, okay, let me externalize my immune system with these foreign things, you know, versus natural things. So he kind of goes in that interview. It's a 2-part episode of like what happens when we unlock the potential of the DNA naturally versus artificially, right? And so we're at that sort of juncture in consciousness as a species, as a civilization, where we're kind of being corralled and steered towards a very dark dystopian transhumanist agenda, and one of interdependence and returning into right relationship with each other, the land, and our soul's potential. Because all the trauma that we've inherited, when you start to heal it, you start to unlock the dormant potential of the DNA. You start to unlock your soul's superpowers, heightened discernment, heightened intuition, heightened psychic capacity, heightened states of awareness, where you're more resourced than anyone in your previous generations and their trauma. And you're seeing from the soul's perspective and how to heal things more effectively. You're learning how to regulate the nervous system where you've inherited generational trauma, like the Ashkenazi trauma that I inherited. Like is wild, like the jaw clenching and the unsafety and the persecution and those kinds of things. And then on the Irish side, it's deprivation from the Irish famine. Like that, we are the generation that gets to decide to break the pattern, and all of that trauma creates a predisposition to the programs that are designed to corral us and move us into that very dark path. So everyone's trauma is being exploited on the planet and re-traumatized. You see it on social media. Something rolls out in the collective, everyone witnesses this horrific thing, everyone's in a trauma reaction, and then here comes the program. That's MK Ultra en masse. Trauma and then programming. That's mind control. All right. And so we have our own trauma that we're dealing with, and then we're being re-traumatized by a portion of psychopathic beings in our society that's instilling trauma on the collective and using that trauma to steer people into predictable, controllable patterns inside of society.
So you can say that you had like the trauma from, say, your parents, like the jaw clenching, like for no reason. It's that.
Way further back, not parents. Up to 5 generations of trauma that we're being asked to clean up. So we go from the conscious level to the subconscious level to the unconscious level. And the path of healing is starting to melt the layers of where the trauma has been hidden. So the first layer a lot of us uncover is our childhood trauma. We're like, oh, wow, this is how my subconscious formed. These are the patterns of survival that I'm in, that comes from my dynamic relationship with my mother, my dynamic relationship with my father, with my sisters, with my schooling system, with my neighborhood, the concentric rings of connection that we were in that form of village. And that's usually the first layer. And then from the subconscious, you get into the unconscious, which is the ancestral. The unconscious holds the ancestral memories. It's in the body, it's in the fascia, it's in the cells, it's in the DNA. And those learned behaviors are stored. And it's just normalized. We have a lot more ways to numb and cope than we ever had. And so a lot of times people don't uncover or are unaware that they're actually in a trauma response or a trauma bond or in a codependent trauma pattern because they just inherit it and it's just normalized. There's no inquiry around it to even recognize what it is.
So, for example, did like your parents and your grandparents have the jaw clench as well?
So my sister has it. My dad had it. If my, I was born, both my grandparents were dead when I was born, my grandfather. So I don't know, but I've been talking to other, like my friend who was just here, who's one of the only other people that I've met that has Italian Irish on one side and Ashkenazi on the other side. He's like, yeah, my father, my uncle, my grandfather all had jaw clenching. It's an Ashkenazi thing.
Wow.
But it's also just a way that a lot of people deal with stress. And that kind of stress is unconscious. When the moment you go to sleep, jaw starts clenching. You wake up, jaw's fine. But at night, it's clenching.
If, for example, right, you were adopted and you didn't know this story, do you reckon you'd still clench your jaw? Is it really the energy or what we've witnessed and therefore we mimic and repeat, or both?
I think it's both. Again, I think what I'm saying and what listeners might want to consider is that the generational trauma is real and it is passed down and is stored. And sometimes it's dormant and sometimes it's aggravated, depending on where we're at in our journey. And it can feel overwhelming, but the path is to deal with what's right in front of you. If you're on the battlefield, you're not going to have the safety to grieve. So the first step is moving towards taking active steps towards safety. And when the nervous system can start to have trust with another human being who's accompanying their nervous system or a safe space to go, then you can start to grieve. And when we get through the first layers of grief, like for me, the trauma that woke me up into the reality that I had more trauma was 9/11. I lost my brother-in-law. He was a firefighter. That was a violent event, most witnessed violent event in history, in our history. And I had to deal with that wave of trauma first. But when I started to move through grieving, I didn't have the tools to grieve. My body shut down. I was using cocaine, alcohol, all these kinds of things. And then my body burnt out. And so I was forced into healing because my body shut down. I could no longer function as a martial artist, as an athlete, as a basketball player. So I was forced to get in touch with the emotions that were underneath my crisis. And that's what's going to happen to a lot of people. It takes some kind of pattern interruption, some kind of crisis to say, hey, life wants you to heal. For some people, it's a breakup. Some people, it's the death of a parent, a loss of a job, whatever it is, something that interrupts and sets in motion an initiation to get you into contact with and into relationship with the dynamic pocket of energy that's actually already alive in your nervous system. So once I started to grieve my brother-in-law, things started opening up. And I was like, oh, wait, there's this other stuff. Oh, wait, I'm not breathing correctly. Oh, wait, there's this. Oh, wait. And thus I entered my 20-year journey of working on myself. So it's going to be different for other people, but I at the onset of COVID, I remember I had this prompt come through, and this is like when the algorithms were different and you could actually reach out to people in mass in certain ways. And I had generated this question of what was the thing that got you onto the spiritual path? Because I wanted to remind people that they were on one, and we're about to face a very big wave of change with the onset of these lockdowns. I was like, I want to drop people into their soul's perspective real quick. And I asked people, what got you on the spiritual path? And the information across the board with these signature things: a breakup, a loss of a loved one, a healing crisis, a loss of a job, one of those things, a peak experience on psychedelics, a near-death experience, right? It's the same 10 things for everybody.
Yeah.
So, and that's going to have a different quality. And obviously there's parallels and there's differences to that person's individual journey, but those are the 10 things that usually catalyze a point where we have to kind of be like, okay, what we're forced to be with existence in a totally different way.
If you had one day left to live, what is the one thing that you would tell the rest of the world?
Face your fear of death so that you can live fully and really prioritize your soul and your soul's deepest whisper over anything else until it brings you on track, and make your contribution to the future of humanity. Get us on track, guys.
And anything you want to promote or plug before we finish?
Yeah, I share a lot of inspiring content on Instagram, but also I've created a more intimate space through my newsletter and my free community. I also have a lot of music that I make, hip hop and neo soul, and I'm going back into the direction of breath work and sound healing. So I do have free offerings, and I also do healing work with people. So there's whatever spectrum you're at, I have something for everyone.
Thanks for listening. If you like this episode, please remember to subscribe, turn the bell notifications on, like the episode, and comment below. And if you want to follow me on Instagram, it's YesKingOliver. Take a look at the other videos to your side. And if you just want to listen to this podcast, you can do so on Apple and Spotify and most other platforms by going to talkwitholiver.com.